man flu. There's always a day before a great thing happens when that great thing was not possible. In January of 1969, it was impossible to walk on the moon. But by the end of the summer, we had walked on the moon.
None of them defy the laws of physics, though.
The laws of physics as defined by us with our limited knowledge and understanding of physics.
I'm sure Courtney worked on Capricorn 1, Chris.
Actually, my business partner did work on Capricorn 1. Yes, where they put the people out to the desert and then pretended that they.
There goes Chris swimming in his new space.
Say that again, JJ.
Is JJ flagging us off?
No.
Oh, okay. We weren't heading into dangerous political territory, were we? No. Or religious or anything else. Well, some people think that UFOs are religion. Yeah.
I believe, I increasingly have suspicion that if all that a very tiny limited subset of humans on this planet know about other intelligent life forms coming from other places and planets, if all of that were to be made known, that it is extremely possible that everything that we know about every religion on this planet would unravel. Absolutely unravel at the seams. Moai?
Here's your proof, Moai.
Have you ever been there?
Easter Island? No.
It's a pretty hard place to get to.
Yeah, it's very hard to get to.
The very first job that we cut, that we also shot at our company, Slice, was a remote on Easter Island. And it took the guy
very remote.
It took the guy like 3 days to get there. It was ridiculous. Our producer and shooter.
It isn't on the
Moai fall into the overall category of
ancient ones, Anasazi,
pre-dynastic architectural phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
There are many such architectural things that are very hard to fathom.
It's complete and cross check.
Copy that.
There's a place, it's called the Aswan.
The Aswan Dam in Egypt. Yes.
The quarry where the
tall statues there.
Well,
they moved them though.
There's an
Made
obelisk.
a religious war didn't blow those up.
They tried.
Well, there's an obelisk that's still in the quarry. It's like 80% quarried. This obelisk
sideways. Yeah.
It's still laying in the ground, and if you were to get it out, we would be hard pressed to move it with the technology that we have today.
Yeah, but they have millions of slaves willing to work. Well, forced to work.
We're broadcasting, guys.
We're talking about history, Alex.
Well, history lesson, Alex. Nothing more.
By the way, my grandson downloaded that app that Jason talked about yesterday. He's already playing with it. We got plenty of time. 15 seconds.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and digital production. Your questions drive the first hour, so go ahead and throw those in. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on, and today we're really excited to have Rob Bridgett on. Rob is a sound designer, and they have been a audio director, mix supervisor, sound designer, recordist since starting in 1993, and the author of the new book, Working with Sound. So Rob's going to be on talking about that. It's a really great book. I've been going through it, and I think it's going to be a great second hour. So take a look at the book during the first hour while you're asking questions, and ask those questions to us for the second hour. And otherwise, we'll get started there with Rob in the second hour. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bo asks, what's the group recommendation for sticky-backed Velcro? I have a lot of electronic gack to secure under desks or to walls.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, on Dexter, we had these huge units that did video playback. They weighed about 1.5 pounds, and I had to stick them underneath desks, and they had to stay there all season, sometimes in a hot stage. And we always used 3M Dual Lock, which is a sticky back hard plastic Velcro. It's not the hook and loop type, but it's the one type that sticks to itself. It's got little posts with little mushroom shaped ends on it. You put it together, but it has that 3M stickiness on the back of it that does not let go almost never. So once you stick something down, you may have trouble getting it off if you ever have to remove it, but it holds good. It holds things stiffly. In other words, once you lock it down, it will not move. It won't, it's unlike the other type wool type Velcro where things can move around a little bit.
Go ahead, Bill.
I once upon a time did a search on industrial Velcro, and it came up some 1.5 inches, and I think they also have 2-inch Velcro tape, essentially. It is sticky back. It has the hook side and the loop side, and I've had that roll for probably 10 years now. It works really well, so I would just do a search and make sure that you specify industrial Velcro rather than common household Velcro. I still have things attached under desks 10 years later, and it's doing fine.
Go ahead, Chris.
Alex, have you ever heard of VHB tape?
I have not.
So this is super interesting, and it's along the same lines, Bo. VHB stands for Very High Bond, and it's double-sided tape, but it's double-sided tape on steroids. It sticks like ridiculously crazy. So like, for example, they're showing here the example of putting together siding on a trailer with double-sided tape. And I will tell you that Jack, our friend, security guard Jack, when he was working on his trailer, he was using VHB. Now, he was backing it up with rivets because it just seemed like the prudent thing to do. But this VHB tape is amazing. And you can build like legitimate structures with double-sided tape. Super expensive, not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but very much worth looking into as a way of fastening stuff together.
Yeah, and the big thing that you have to decide really when you look at this is how long do you want that tape to stay, and how sticky do you want it to be when you pull it off. So what I mean by that is that there's two adhesives, of course. What's going on? So we have some Velcros that we get that once you put that Velcro on, it's never coming off. Like it's going to take the paint part of the metal, like it's going to be there, but the Velcro comes on and off easily. There's other ones that we have that you can peel that sticky part off. Obviously, it's not as robust, and a lot of uses will go into it. And then the other side of that is that some of the Velcro, like what Courtney was talking about, and some just thicker Velcro, tends to just hang on really, really effectively. Now that stick, so basically what happens is that it's very hard to take it off. And so you have to make those decisions. Generally, the finer grained Velcro is going to come off and on to itself more effectively. When it's larger and more sparse, it tends to be a lot rougher, and it'll tend to want to hang on a lot harder. And then you just have to decide what kind of glue that's going. The best way to do this is to think about what you need, and then to buy a bunch of them to test it. Fortunately, they're not very expensive in small quantities. And so typically what I've done in the past is bought 3 or 4 different styles of those and played with them a little bit to make a decision. But that's what I'm measuring is how does the Velcro go on and off to itself, and how does the sticky part stick or not stick to the surface. Next question.
Next question comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Can the panel recommend a USB headset mic combo with good mic audio quality?
USB only, I guess, is the question here. So it's a USB mic with headset with good mic quality. There's not that many great ones. Most of the ones that you would get in this area are going to look like gamer headsets. So they're going to be that's the most popular version of I want a headset with a mic. And generally, the mics are somewhere between horrible and not super useful. Like they're good for gamers, I guess, but obviously gamers never listen to music because the range of the mics on those gamer headsets is somewhere between like 800 and 2000. Like it's just like this tiny little sliver of what you're willing to get that makes it very easy, I guess, to hear while you're playing and yelling at each other. But it's not a great experience. And so I haven't really found, I've definitely looked for this type of thing and haven't been super successful at finding that. Bill?
I've had the same kind of problems. Most of those inexpensive ones have inexpensive mic elements and not the best preamplification and the rest of that in there. One thing I would suggest is that it is possible to adapt XLR or even the other common mic connectors, TA3F, TA4F, TA5F. Those are the tiny ones that have 2, 3, or 4 connections in there, and adapt them into a USB system that will get you far better microphones to use into your USB system, but it just requires more effort. But then you can go to some of the things like the Countryman or the DPAs or things like that. If you're really looking for mic quality, none of the really super small diaphragm things, even the best of them, and I had a Countryman that I thought sounded really wonderful for years and did really well, but it's still not the same as a desk mic if you can keep up with the larger diaphragms. They just sound more natural over the course of time to my ear.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. The Neumann MT48 audio interface has been out for a little while now. Anyone on the panel or the community used one yet? And he's got a link there.
What I will say is that Neumann is an amazing, they just make amazing mics, and so it looks like a really, really nice interface. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I haven't used one yet. The Sennheiser, made by, Sennheiser owns Neumann's logo and brand now. It looks interesting. It's got some super low noise, 2 mic preamps and 2 instrument preamps and 4 outputs, headphone outputs. So it's similar to something like the Rodecaster, and it has a USB-C output, designed for interfacing with workstations and so on. And it has 4 headphone outputs, or at least 2. So it's interesting. It's awfully expensive though, $1,800.30. You're paying a lot for that logo on there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem that I have is that entry into this process for me is, really has to have some kind of noise assist or some kind of noise reduction. That's just how I view it. I know that's not what everybody's using it for. And so maybe you use it for something else, but almost everybody that uses a small interface like this is sitting in a non-professional experience, non-professional location, and noise is a thing that they have to think about. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, actually, I was trying to undo it. Courtney made my point, and I was the one who messed up the question.
Oh, got it. So the all I was going to say is that I have a lot of respect for Neumann. We've used a lot of their mics. At $1,800, I would rather have a Mix Pre-10. That's a lot more. That is a lot more mixer than the Neumann, in my opinion. You're going to have state of the art preamps. You can have a noise assist option, and you've got some XLR in and out, more XLR in and some out. I think a Mix Pre-10 would be better at the same price. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway comes up next, looking for a simple audio recording and editing tool for basic adjustments that can easily export segments, preferably with an integration to export files to a web server or podcasting service. He's trying to help a church make their workflow more efficient.
So one of the things that I don't have as much experience with, but it is something that that Jeff Cohen has been slowly, feeding me information about, is Reaper. And Reaper has a lot of automation tools that may be able to do exactly this. Go ahead, Courtney.
My go-to is Audacity. It's free. It's open source. It's cross-platform. It works on everything: Mac, PC, Linux. It's a good recorder. It has a lot of the tools for visualizing audio. You can cut things up and export them in a variety of formats. It records in WAV format and its own. It has 32-bit float. It has a little bit of a steep learning curve, but it's not nearly as deep as Reaper is. Reaper is very deep. And Reaper costs money too. There's, I think, a free download.
Money?
Audacity.
Money for
Audacity is completely free, and it's been available for more than a decade now. And I put it on every computer that I have, just so I have something to record and edit audio with.
Yeah, I think that my tendency against free is mostly that I don't know how long they'll last, and I know the development cycle will be much slower. So I don't know if Audacity is moving as fast as the other ones, but I would take a look at some of the automation within Reaper. As far as there's just a lot of automation tools that are available that might be. I would probably approach this with Logic myself. I think Logic will let you export all those segments out on their own. Now, of course, Logic has it's $300, so you have to buy into it, but you can put it on all your computers, which I do. so anyway, once you buy it once, I really so Logic is probably how I would approach that. You could also, I just don't know about, it's the automation part that I'm not certain about. I'm fairly certain that Fairlight within Resolve would export it. Export the segments. Audacity probably would as well. I would use Logic, and Reaper has just tons of automation tools that you may want to take a look at, because they may do all the things you want to do automatically. Next question.
Paul Wallace comes up next from Austin, Texas. Arc, the Mac iOS browser from the browser company, is finally ditching its wait list. The browser helps users take notes, redesign web pages, organize tabs, but no AI yet. Comment, and he's got a link there to arc.net.
Sure. Sorry, I'm not in the browser world. Like, new browsers don't. I'm not looking for new browsers, so I don't know if anyone else here is looking for new browsers. I'm kind of past that. The problem is I got too many links and too many other things. I have Chrome and Safari. There's a couple of reasons I use those too, and that's all I know how to use anymore. As soon as I get onto a computer, if it's a PC, I put Chrome on it. If it's a Mac, I put Chrome on it, and then I go between Safari and Chrome. Next question.
Next one comes from Scott Wasserman in Detroit, Michigan. Frame.io users, I just discovered the pricing page shows much higher active storage, 2 terabytes for Pro, 3 terabytes for Team, for the same price as before. No more archival storage included and a lower user limit. It requires emailing support to update your account.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so I've noticed this across services. I guess the big server farm people must be now working on such economies of scale that I noticed that my iCloud account has also been increasing its capacity without me spending any more than I did before. So I think this is an across the industry trend. I hope it continues. It's always great having more storage as your files get bigger and bigger and you need more. But I'm hoping this continues to be a trend, that they just keep upgrading capacity in the back end of these things without us having to pay any more for them. That'd be great.
I better read my emails I keep on getting these emails from my account rep at Frame.io going, hey, we need to talk. It's probably because they changed those rules. So they're trying to talk to me about them. I'm just kind of like, I've been using Frame now for 4 or 5 years, and it is my primary way of moving files around. And so it's a little bit more expensive. I have a lot of stuff that goes into archive. I have a lot of stuff, and I got to tell you, there's nothing better than a client asking for something that we worked on 2 years ago. I just go up to the cloud and send them a link. It works. It's super nice to be able to do that. Chris has his own. He's built his own. He can do the same thing, but for those of us who can't build their own,
going back to 2007, Alex, and it's all online. I can instantly accessible.
Next question.
John Pretto, Las Vegas, Nevada. Here on the panel, the congressional hearing on UAP is happening as we speak. Will the witnesses testify that our government has recovered alien ships? Will we see new technology come from it?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I think not. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking by it. If they had given us some great technology, we'd have already exploited it by now, and Apple would have already deprecated.
Transistors. That's all I'm saying. Transistors. So go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think here's the thing. If something had landed that had a technology that was truly going to revolutionize some part of our world, there's no way you can keep that secret. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't care how much you lock it down. If it's truly going to be planetary changing, it will get out because people just want to be, I'm going to whisper to you about this thing we found out in the lab. It's amazing. And, just people are human nature. Well, you can lock down some things in some categories, but not the truly this is going to change everything. There's too much, I think, pressure on being the person to break the news.
Go ahead, Chris.
Alex is crawling out of his skin because he wants to lock this question and he wants to move on. But I will say that anytime somebody uses, there's just a couple of arguments here. Anytime somebody uses the argument, Bill, well, if there was something, it would have gotten out. It's gotten out. People have been talking about Roswell since Roswell, okay? And I'm not saying that there's little green men and little spaceships, but anybody says, oh, well, we would have that technology. What do you think this is? This thing is such a quantum leap ahead of the technology that we went to, the moon with. It's not even funny. So I'm going to tell you, I'm a firm believer. Absolutely, we've been visited. And absolutely, we are living under the shadow of technology that has been shared with us, in my belief, from millennia ago.
I mean, there's even whole companies, Alienware. I mean,
at this point,
they
they're
don't
just
even
rubbing it in our face.
They don't even hide the fact that they make it with hide it. They just are like alien. They just say we're making this with alien technology, Alienware, and
I will tell you,
right under our noses.
It's easier to make a joke about it than it is to talk about it seriously because it's a disturbing thought. If you want to really delve into it, it is a disturbing thought. But I'm going to tell you that in my lifetime, I was born in 1962, in my lifetime, there will be irrefutable evidence that this civilization has been affected by other civilizations.
I think we're all from Mars. I think we jumped off because Mars was going bad.
Again, humor is easier than dealing with it.
I think we all started in Mars, and then I think and then we came here because we ruined the environment
and
of Mars.
Elon is just trying to be
and
retro.
Now we're here trying to go back, and I think that would be the funniest thing if we figured out that we're going back to the planet that we left in the first place. All right, next question.
Didn't shave this morning. I should have used Occam's razor.
We can talk about this way longer.
Let's go to the next question. Hakan Fors of Stockholm, Sweden says, any suggestions how to track, pan, and tilt of a tripod head outdoors to feed into Unreal? Looking at adding on-field graphics in sports.
Oh, this would be a good one. I mean, the question is whether you're trying to have encoders on the thing, so you're actually following that, or whether you're trying to do a PTZ head. So most of the things that you've seen, my understanding is most of the things that you've seen, we've got some people in our group that have think about this a lot. You want to look at like the Panasonic 150s have telemetry, so they'll pass telemetry back, so they'll tell you exactly what they're doing while they're doing it, and that's what you really need. Is you need something that's going to pass that telemetry back, and the only PTZ head that I know of that will do that is the Panasonic. Now you can get something more complex. When you go outside, it gets a little harder because a lot of the tracking systems we use have to do with having sensors or visual sensors or other kinds of sensors that are around the camera that are measuring that. There are some that will manage that encoder. Mickey suggests looking at NCAM, so that's another one to look at. But I would say that if I was trying to do the graphics, what I would do is I'd use a Panasonic 150 and I would use establishing shots exactly the way that the NFL does, which is, and so you're not trying to like follow the action, but you want a wide shot of the field. You're going to roll down and have the graphics flow in. I would do that. And again, you could do a lot of the quote unquote AR stuff without that tracking by simply just doing, still shots to start with, to have those fly over and feel like they're into it. So the first thing I would do is just have shadows, lighting that looks realistic, so on and so forth. But I would probably then move to a pan tilt zoom head like the 150. Go ahead, Courtney.
If you're serious about this, there's a company called Mosys that makes head tracking kits that you can put on Sackler or other popular pan tilt heads that are data encoders that track the pan tilt, and then you have a separate encoder for the zoom and focus, because you have to track all those things because they make a difference in how the image looks, and they have a pretty high degree of resolution on them, so you can look there.
Yeah, and the hard part there is that when you start getting into you're right, the Mosys is great. I've mostly seen Mosys used inside. They show a picture of it being used outside. I have a feeling that the calibration process of any given camera or lens into the Mosys system will not be trivial, especially if you're doing it outside at the same level of being able to just, you'll probably spend the same amount of money and time, or much less time, and maybe about the same amount of money on the Panasonic. So I really think hard about using a PTZ over. I mean, and again, we've used Mosys systems internally in studios, and they work great. I don't know how that would work very well outside. Here's the problem with measuring the encoding of. The problem is you need to know exactly where the camera is, and the problem with measuring the encoding from a tripod head is that the level of accuracy that tripod head has to have to be at a millimeter of accuracy in the far end is really tough. We tried to do this 25 years ago. we've been fiddling with this for a long time. And so if it moves just a little, if it's just minuscules of a degree off, it's going to look like it's coming off of the field. And so that's really the real challenge there. Next question.
Next one comes from Andre Dole in Berlin, and he comments on the Madewell AIO as mainstreaming and recording device, and he's got a link to it there.
And this is let's see. So it's multi-input video processing signal. So it is, it's an encoder that can take kind of anything and turn it into, this is, basically what you have, HDMI and as well as SDI, I believe. And then it'll do 4K 30 out to a great number of things. It also has a recorder built into it. I mean, Madewell builds great boxes, and this is this looks like another great box. I don't know does anyone know what the price point is on this guy? It does look like it will tie back into HDMI or SDI. It looks like you can take both of them in. So this is another one of those things where you could use it as a presentation tool. So I guess the thing that would be the most similar to this, what we're really comparing this to, is the Blackmagic. This is I don't think that's the one. Yeah. This is what Chris is showing here. But I think this is most similar to the Blackmagic web presenter. I think that one of the advantages of this one is that it takes in a lot of other formats, and protocols, or supports more protocols than the Blackmagic does. I didn't see a price go by, so I don't know exactly what the
800 retail.
800 retail, yeah. So, if it does something different than what the web presenter does, I think it's probably a great value, because Madewell generally doesn't make things that are overpriced. I mean, they're usually pretty. And it looks, 4K 30 is a great format there. So yeah, it looks pretty good. We'll have to take a look at it a little bit deeper. Maybe we'll get them to send us one to test against the web presenter. But it's a web presenter. It's a little bit more versatility. Next question.
Next question comes from Bo Cordell in Stockholm, Sweden. Do you know of any solution to sync multiple PTZ cameras to a single point of interest from multi-direction with only one pan tilt zoom operator?
Yes, this is done by Mark Roberts. They have a follow camera function. Now, I don't know if the first camera it's not usually a PTZ. It's usually a person following it. And I don't know what the name of the system is, but basically, and I think it was connected to Nikon, if I remember correctly, because I think they bought Mark Roberts. But it's like a follow camera, and what it's designed for is specifically sports that you can follow someone running down the field, and the Polymotion, I think, might be what it is here. And so basically, you can have one camera operator following the action that's going on, and then you have all the other cameras. Basically, they're mapped onto that field. So it's harder when you start going anywhere. But if you're on a flat plane like a field, you can have one person following that camera, and all the other ones will follow the same position on the field, and make it and have it tied that way. Next question.
By the way, I mistake that. That wasn't Bo's question. That was Håkan Force's question from Norway. So thank you for that. Bo Coral's question is next, and that's when you're rebuilding a machine from scratch, do you prefer ISOs or images, and what are the pros and cons of each?
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't use ISOs. I do use disk images, and I try to keep them on an NVMe drive like this. These are pretty inexpensive now. They're incredibly fast, and it's easy. This has a USB connection on it. This is one of the OWCs. There are other manufacturers. But you just want something that's really fast, and you want to build a disk image that has not only the OS restore, but if there's any things you kind of specify, I make a disk image after I've made some modifications to it. So it's just easy to kind of come in with everything pre-installed. That's my solution. Others may find a different path.
Go ahead, Courtney.
In the Windows world, when I rebuild a system, I start over again with the latest ISO of Windows installed, downloaded from Microsoft. And then still you're going to have to do about a day's worth of updates to it after you get it installed. And then I just have a folder on a NVMe drive that has all the programs that I normally use, and I just call it new computer setup. And so I reinstall every single program into that new installation, because if you make an existing image or a copy of an image off to a hard drive, an ISO, and then just restore that image, you also restore all the problems that image has built up over the years. So there's a lot of cruft that accumulates on most operating systems as you go along. And installed and uninstalled stuff, it leaves behind little trails of stuff and that's the stuff you want to get rid of when you want to rebuild your system. So I always believe it's best to start from scratch, start with a blank hard drive, install the operating system from its current version, downloadable from the manufacturer, and then install all your applications. I know it takes a long time, but your machine will run a lot faster, because it won't have all that cruft left over from all those programs that you installed over the years and then uninstalled, and they didn't completely uninstall.
Yeah, I can't think of any time in the last 20 years that I've used an image. Like I always put everything back on one at a time. Mac or PC, doesn't matter. The Mac makes it easier because all my little apps are all stuff I bought through the App Store, and I just hit go, and it just goes and just installs the latest versions of everything. And then I just I usually only put the stuff on that I'm using. This goes on my iOS devices as well as my computer. I put things on interactively because I don't just automatically go, oh, I'm going to put that on because I don't know if I'm going to use it again. And so I put things on as I need. There's a couple core apps that I know I'm going to need, but then after that, I kind of put them on as needed, and that way the computer stays a little cleaner. Go ahead, Bill.
I should have specified, I don't make images of computers that have been running for a long time. I make images of the computer when I first get it, and it has just the stock operating system and the rest of that stuff. So hopefully it is the current state of the machine when it was starting, and I don't image after I've done a tremendous amount of work in the computer after that because of the exact problem that Courtney noted.
And David Brady points out, if you're building a fleet of computers in short order, build one, image that, and then lay them down. And that makes a lot of sense. If you're doing it all at the same time, that's important. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, but if you do that one image, you have to have enterprise licensing for all of the software that you put on there, because you may run into problems then when you try and activate those licenses on all those computers that have the same license, if they're tied to an individual computer. So beware of that. And I was going to point out that most computers these days come from the manufacturer with a restore partition, hidden partition automatically on the hard drive that lets you restore it to the factory original state by running some routine either on Mac or PC that lets you restore to its original state. It wipes out everything on the drive and restores from that original restore partition to the state that it was in when you bought it.
A quick reminder that you can ask questions throughout the hour. So if you've got questions for the second hour for Rob Bridgett, or if you have questions for the first hour, just general questions. It can be audio questions. It can be general questions. This is our audio day. Go ahead and throw those into Makana and make sure to vote on those questions so we know what order you'd like us to ask them in. Let's go ahead to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and it's a British company has created a rechargeable amplifier that can be charged from solar panels or a wind turbine. The company claims it can make events sustainable. Do you think it will make a real impact?
Maybe. Like it, I think that, buying something that's a tricky, that I just need it to be a good amplifier, and then I can figure out more sustainable ways of powering it. I don't think I'd want the amplifier itself to build that into it. It's just, then I'm now stuck with something that's kind of probably not the same quality as what I'm using otherwise. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, semiconductor stuff has gotten so much more efficient that normal small current draw things would probably work great for this kind of a solution. Amplification is a little different in that it tends to suck up power. If you have 500 watt amplifier there, that's going to be burning through a lot of juice over the course of the time it's in operation. And I'm not sure that either a solar or a wind thing would keep up with that. Maybe if you charged it for a day or two and then were able to draw on it over the course of a concert. But I would always want some sort of generator backup because I wouldn't trust that it would keep going on a big amplifier.
Courtney?
Yes, this takes me back to the original portable amplifier, the Pig Nose, invented by Richard Edlund of sci-fi fame, who was known by working on 2001, doing the visual effects and so on. So he invented the Pig Nose because he wanted to play his guitar at the beach. It's battery powered. It's been around. We can still buy them today for $123.
The Robert Englund, who is Freddy Krueger?
No. Richard Edlund.
Richard.
Oh, okay.
Visual effects.
Why don't I heard that word? I thought, there's a career.
There you go. Next question.
Next question from Bo Cordell and Charleston again. The Ventoy bootable USB disk utility was recommended on the show a while back, and it has already proven incredibly useful. What other hidden gems does the group have to offer?
It's hard. The one that I'm playing with right now that I haven't got quite working, but I think it's going to be a gem. So this is a future gem. It's a little keyboard, the smallest keyboard ever. See this little guy here. So this is a tiny little keyboard. Now you probably understand why would you need a keyboard with 3 buttons. But what I need a keyboard for 3 buttons is frame forward, frame back on my PowerPoint slides. So I just, and even this was more than I needed. Like I have it, I've been using this, but the Stream Deck, but I was like, I have other things to do with 6 keys is 3 keys more than I need. And so this is my little thing that I've been playing with. And anyway, so I think that that's going to be something that I,
what do you do with the 3rd key, Alex?
I don't even need that. I could have a 2-key one, but I haven't figured out what to do with the 3rd one. So, but it's in a row, and you always need it's a little extra capacity there. So, I got a little headroom. If I need one more key, I can have it. And so anyway, but the forward and back is all I'm using on this guy, and it is I'm going to be using it actually later today. And so anyway, it's a cool little keyboard. It's like $10 or something like that. I don't know. It's not particularly expensive.
Oh, put a link in.
Here's
That's
the
cool.
question. Here's the question, Alex.
Yeah.
Did you use key 1 and 3 to go forward and back?
Of course.
The middle? Okay.
No. It's JKL written small.
I can space them. I can space them out. So I can. There's no. You could do JKL. Look, you can get a little JKL keyboard. That would be. So just have it on the corner. I probably. I got to think about that.
Actually,
and is it wireless?
Sounds really good.
It's not wireless. It's wired.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't even care. I might have to leave.
All right. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida is up next. I have an old Windows 10 desktop that was damaged in moving. I'd like to get that data off the intact drive. Any recommendations for bare drive adapters that I may connect to an M2 MacBook? Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I have a bunch of these. It depends on the type of drives that are in that old. If they're SATA drives, you can get one of these SATA USB 3 adapters for 2.5-inch hard drives, and you can also get them for 3.5-inch hard drives that just go to USB and they're cheap. They're usually about under $10, and just plug them into any USB 3 port on any PC or Mac, and you should be able to read the data off of it. On a MacBook, it depends on how the drive was formatted, as long as it wasn't BitLockered or encrypted. If it's not encrypted, you should be able to just take the drive out. If it's a spinning drive, connect it to a SATA or SATA to USB adapter, which you can find on Amazon, and then be able to find those files and read them on your MacBook and transfer them, if it's, as long as it's in TFS or FAT32 or EXFAT.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. Does Dante work with AES 67?
You can't work with it directly, to my knowledge. So you would need to have something that's going to convert from one to the other. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, on the Madewell Ultra Encode AIO, can it be used to convert HDMI or SDI to USB like the Blackmagic Design web presenter?
While I haven't used it, I did look at the page, and it does look like it will do that conversion. So it will turn it into a webcam, as well as the many other things that it produces, or that's what it looks like from the web page, but we haven't gotten to test it yet. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana says, what are the possible gotchas of using a large diaphragm condenser mic outdoors in a humid environment?
I don't think that the humidity is as big of a deal as the large diaphragm. Like, it's outside, it picks up a lot of things. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, typically we have problems with the small diaphragm condenser microphones used outdoors. The Chef's microphones are notorious for that because they have a very narrow gap between the diaphragm and the backplane. And moisture can gather in there, and it can short out because there's a high voltage that goes between the two to vary the capacitance. And it changes condensation on the diaphragm, changes the capacitance of the microphone. The larger diaphragm microphones have less of a problem because they have more of a gap with a larger diaphragm. So less to worry about there. Any microphone in a moisture situation other than the Sennheiser MKH4 series or 8 series, or the RF series, RF condenser microphones, could generate problems in a heavy humidity. If you're in the steamy jungle somewhere and it's 100% humidity, then you might have a problem of crackling noises.
Go ahead, Bill.
Not humidity. To me, it's wind. LDC, large diaphragm condensers, are so sensitive that you put them in a windy situation, they're horrible. As a matter of fact, I've been testing. I have an audiobook that came up, and I decided to use my Neumann, and I brought it into the studio here, and I replaced this microphone with it, and was recording the first couple of chapters of the audiobook with it. And I had all sorts of issues just because it was so sensitive that even with the noise reduction that Cedar is providing me, I found myself, every time something changed the environment, like something 2 rooms away turned on, or the air condition, Lord forbid, started, the noise reduction would eventually do it, but it was just so sensitive that it would turn out to be a struggle. So I'm going to take it back in the voice booth to eliminate those problems. Large diaphragm condensers are wonderful mics, but they do not solve all problems, and sensitivity is one of the problems they bring to a situation like that.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI launched the Frontier Model Forum. So just what is a Frontier AI model? And he's got a link there to OpenAI's site.
Go ahead, John.
All of the CEOs of these companies met with the Biden administration last week, and this is the conclusion of what they came together with the government. So we'll see what happens. I don't see Russia or China joining any sort of coalition like this in the future. So we'll see.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this is what they call the tragedy of the commons, which is that, and I think this was done on purpose, which is by making a lot of this stuff open source and having everybody have a lot of the technology. It makes it almost impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. Like, it's a really complicated problem because you really can't stop it at this point. And so, again, we can decide that we're not going to do it. And then all that means is that some other country will get ahead of us. And Japan has already been saying that they're really going to leave it wide open. They want to use this as innovation. I don't think we can, as John said, I don't think we can expect China or Russia to follow anything that we ask them to do in this area. They want to be competitive. So it really makes it almost impossible for us to try to slow this down, and I think that that's a mistake. I think that all you do is you fall behind somebody else that's moving very quickly. And I don't think there's any way to avoid that. I think we have to figure out how we work with it, but not how do we slow it down, because slowing it down just means we're behind. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Brevard, North Carolina says, has anyone on the panel had a chance to watch the documentary 32 Sounds by Sam Green? Run, don't walk to the theater, in my opinion, he says.
Oh, I think that this is coming. I think this is coming to San Rafael. In fact, I'm really glad that he brought this up, because it's this Friday. so anyway, I am now, my schedule has been changed. I'm going to try to get there. We should see if we can do a get together. Maybe we'll get 32 Sounds is, it sounds like a great documentary. And I've been wanting to see it. And I have to admit, I think I even put it now, if I look back, I think I even have it in my calendar. So I just haven't looked that far out yet that I was going. I think it's in my calendar. So anyway, I think I put it in there, like, I am going to go see this. So we'll see. I'm going to try to see it this weekend. It's touring, so you have to kind of keep track of what city it's in. I don't think it's available online yet. So it's still going from theater to theater. So let's see if we can, some of us will go to it. Maybe if you're interested in going to that with me on Friday, go ahead and send me a Discord, and we'll figure it out. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Has anyone worked with Vocaline? It looks very useful for mixing or remixing pop dance tracks and making vocals fit a new rhythm track, but is it mostly a post-centric tool?
I think it is mostly a post-centric tool. I don't think that this would process in real time yet. So I don't think that that's the case. But yeah, it looks like a pretty cool, it's the kind of thing that we might want to try to bring in for a second hour and take a closer look at. But it looks like a pretty great piece of software. Let's go ahead into the next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. Flipper Zero now has an app store. Talk about the significance and usefulness of Flipper Zero. And there is an article from The Verge that is referenced there, you can see.
I'm trying to sorry, it's hard when we get kind of obscure links in the middle of the show, because we don't get a chance to take a look at them there. So this is a marketplace that makes it easier to install. It's a dolphin themed digital multi-tool. I don't understand.
Are they trying to displace the potatoes and radishes?
Exactly. We're now into dolphins. What happens if you feed the potato the potato to the dolphin? That's the thing that you have to be very concerned about here. I'm so confused. This looks like a little bit of a hacker tool where you can. I'm looking at pictures where it's actually. It looks like some kind of basic automation tool that also will connect out to a breadboard. Well, I'm seeing a breadboard here, so I'm not entirely certain. I don't know really what I'm looking at here. So it's it looks a little Arduino-ish, but it's like in a box, and so it's got like a little automation tool. We'd have to do some more research on it. It's a Swiss. They call it the Swiss Army knife of antennas. It's an RFID NFC, sub G wireless RFID NFC and Bluetooth radio. So it has all of those radios built into it, and it can receive and transmit infrared signals. It has a USB-C port and a row of GPIO ports on the top that let the interface go to other hardware. Okay. It's kind of so basically what it looks like is you can pair it and then send it commands, and it can take those commands out and turn them into either RFID. It can turn them into a variety of different signals there. So interesting approach.
It sounds a little bit like a remote control hub. Is that its function, to take signals from those various things and turn them into commands?
Yeah, you can send it out with electrical commands, or you could again connect. There actually might be some use for me now that I made fun of it at the beginning because I didn't know what it was, but now I'm kind of like, well, maybe I'll buy one. I don't know what they're. I don't know how to. Oh, they're $15. I think, or it looks like it's $15. So it's not a particularly big commitment. So we'll take a look at it a little closer. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next, and he says, in a behind-the-scenes article from Oppenheimer, it shows a camera operator with the IMAX camera on his shoulder. Considering the bulk and/or weight of the camera, wouldn't there be a risk of shoulder injury when shooting for long periods?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, well, you can't shoot for long periods because the handheld version of this only holds 2 minutes of film, and then you have to take it apart and reload it, which takes about 10 or 15 minutes 10 minutes or so to reload. So, and that's the DP with it on his shoulder there, and I'm sure he's about 3 inches shorter now.
Yeah, it's it is IMAX is a commitment. I mean, it's such a heavy piece of machinery to make that work. So it's an interesting puzzle there. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, all camera operators who work with large cameras, they are athletes in their own way. They have to really work out to be able to achieve smooth shots. The people even who use the assisted things like Steadicams and stuff like that, I've watched the good ones at NAB and things like that, and they're all built a kind of a particular way. You can see that they've really taken care of themselves physically. They work out, their shoulder and arm muscles are well defined, and typically they just have a stability about them when they're using those that is remarkable. I've tried when I've thrown a Steadicam rig on to come anywhere close to that and just realize that I'm not built nor conditioned to be able to do that kind of work. It's a specialist job.
You're good, Courtney.
Yeah, a bigger problem, Douglas, is for the boom operator. When digital cameras came about, where you didn't have mag changes, and film cameras, you always had to stop. You couldn't continue on a take longer than about 11 minutes, because that was a typical mag length on a regular 35 millimeter camera, and on some handheld cameras only 4 minutes. So, and on the IMAX only about 2 minutes, a minute, 3 minutes. So when they went to digital cameras, the digital version of the IMAX camera would be a big problem, because not necessarily for the cameraman, because the cameraman gets used to it. He can get used to holding it on his shoulder. But even if it's on a tripod, the poor boom operator that's holding that boom out over their head with a 1.5 pound microphone on it, and the director goes, "That was a great 3 minute take. Let's go again," and action. And the camera doesn't have to cut because it's got a hard drive on it that can store, 4 hours worth of footage, or at least an hour's worth of footage. So you don't get a break to relax. And that's the real problem. That can cause serious health injuries. And the unions were involved in mandating physical breaks between takes so that the boom operator can relax or switch out a boom operator. And other people that have to handhold stuff during the take, because when the takes turn into 30-minute long pieces, it's intolerable.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is back with this one. The European Union enacts the 43 billion euro CHIPS Act, part of an ambitious plan to produce 20% of the world's chips by 2030, after final approval from ministers. Please comment.
Sure. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, we had that here. We had the CHIPS Act here, and TSMC decided they were going to build a big plant in Arizona,
yeah, not
Arizona, and they announced just recently that they cannot find enough workers or technically able people to build that plant right now. So they're delaying the construction of it because they just can't find enough workers to do it that are skilled enough in building. Those are very high tech plants that take a lot of care. They have to be designed and built under dust-free conditions and so on. So it takes a great deal of expertise to build those chip plants, and that's why they take 3 or 4 years to build. And right now there's a shortage of workers to do that worldwide, and I would think the EU is going to run into that same problem.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, very much so. I've been paying attention to that because some of the feeds from where I used to live back in Scottsdale have been talking about the TSMC plant. It's had, exactly as Courtney says, a kind of a labor issue. Particularly these things now, we're down to 3 nanometer chips. That's an unfathomably small working environment. So I don't completely understand the process of making those. I know it has to do with photolithography and things like that, but it's extraordinarily high precision work. And the technicians, there just aren't a lot of them in the world. And we keep going faster and faster. I remember when 6 nanometers was like, wow, and that seemed to be a year ago. And now they're down to 3 nanometers, and you just wonder how small they can get these things. And it's going to require retraining, I think, a lot of global technicians. So if you have a real interest in that, boy, that sounds like it would be an ongoing career that would have paid a lot of dividends. But yeah, they were talking specifically about having to bring lots of engineers from the TSMC plants in the Pacific Rim here to Arizona, over there to Arizona, to get this thing built and in place and working.
And the problem is it doesn't pay a lot of dividends to the folks that live over to where it's getting built. So the salaries in that are in those countries are not the same as the salaries in Europe and the United States. So it's not only just finding people, but it's finding people that you can keep at those salaries. And so it doesn't make any sense. I know that people think that they want to, and sure, there's now $43 billion that someone's going to spend as they figure out that they can't get it done. Next question.
Håkan Fors in Stockholm, Sweden again. A suggestion for how to pull a region of interest from a 4K NDI feed.
I would think that it's going to be something like Memo Live or OBS or vMix. All of those things should be able to bring those feeds in. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was going to say screencasts and some of those things will do it in post, but if you didn't specify live, but I'm going to kind of assume that you're talking about doing it live. And so I would think that some of the tools like Alex suggested do it. If you need to do it in post, there are quite a few things down to the level of Screencast or even QuickTime Pro that will allow you to define a region of interest and capture that from an existing file into another file. That's pretty trivial.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
You might check with AJA because they make a bunch of region of interest scan converters. They're mostly SDI or HDMI, and I don't know if they handle 4K. So you'd have to convert it from NDI to SDI or HDMI, run it through a region of interest generator or converter, and then output it in whatever format you need. But check with AJA because they make a number of them that are scan converters that are scalers that do that kind of stuff. Also, Geffen makes some too, I believe. So check them out.
Also, before we go to the next question, I figured we have some time. It's the audio day, and I thought I would give a little bit of a tour. I had torn something apart. I thought it'd be fun to show everybody. This is what I've been playing with for our next vision. So what this is here is obviously a blimp, and in here, let's see if you can see it. Hidden in there is an Ambio mic. So that's the Sennheiser Ambio mic that's in there. It usually has a cap on it, but I was showing somebody else. So it's 4 little mics, but the problem we had, of course, was wind. That was kind of becoming problematic there. So we put it inside of this blimp. Now this blimp closes up. So you can see this little guy here. Let's see if I can get this all to work without it spinning around. So this will snap in. It's actually a pretty well-made blimp that you can do it. These little these are all magnets, by the way. They just snap on, and you can kind of snap this in, and then you turn these little guys, and they will lock it into place, so it doesn't go anywhere. So that's the blimp, and that's the first step of making this not make a lot of noise. And then we add. I'm not going to try to pull this on air, but this is the. I don't know. We tend to refer to this as a dead cat, but this is so what you. It's not. There was no cat involved with it, but you pull this over top, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's in action. So we're using this for ambisonic, and the ambisonic correction. So here is what it looks like when we're in action here. So this is testing it at the moment. We're still working on a couple of the pipeline issues here, but this is the mic that I just showed you here. And then it's got 4 outputs that are going into the Scorpio. And then the Scorpio is knocking those out as AES into this embedder. This is a Blackmagic embedder. So we have the signal that goes out here. It's a 4K signal. And then it is going through this embed, and then it goes into this live view, and then goes to San Rafael. And so the interesting thing here is also we have 2 mics. And so those two handheld mics, the cool thing about those is those are going into channels 1 and 2, and then we're sending these other channels separately as ambisonic in 4 other channels. And the advantage of that is that we are by doing that, we can send back that ambisonic information, but 2 microphones individually. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I realized I hadn't probably shown you the kit before, or that's kind of the open. We're just testing a new pipeline for it. And anyway, so we have that kit put together, and we're kind of pushing that out. Now, once it gets back, we convert the ambisonic to 5.1. But what's cool is now we can attenuate the 5.1 because the mics that we're talking into are we're going to drive those down the center, and the ambisonic provides the atmosphere. So we have control over that. And so we're pretty excited about using that in at SIGGRAPH. And so we're just, but I thought I'll probably give you some updates as we get a little closer. Go ahead, Courtney.
On that setup, have you ever found a 4-channel wireless transmitter that keeps the phase correct for transmitting ambisonic, or does it always have to be hardwired with the same length of XLR cables to your mixer?
Yeah,
kind of encumbers you, so you couldn't send it out, to a remote location to gather ambisonic.
So we're going to test it. So I think that one of the things that we're looking at is, I was talking to Mickey about this, is that we're using wired right now, so I can just get the pipeline working. And then we do have the electrosonic mics that we're going to use. And so we're going to try to connect it with electrosonic and just see what happens, see if we can tune those. We think that there may be a way for us to tune those microphones to the, to be able to get them into phase. So we're going to take a look at that. That would obviously revolutionize the process to do that. We're also looking at potentially, do we have more control if we go to, for instance, the sound devices A20s? They have a lot of control of how we can talk to those, and we might be able to find a way to get them to sync up. So we're looking at a couple different wireless options. We definitely want to move to wireless. I think that it would revolutionize what we're doing. Yeah, go ahead.
And they just announced the new sound devices transmitter yesterday, I think. So take a look at it. It's $2,300 for the single transmitter that goes to that A20 receiver and the 4-channel receiver.
Yeah, and
each transmitter is about $2,300.
Which is, I guess, in my world, that's about what we pay for transmitters. so like those are, we usually pay about that much for what we do. So that's not that big of a stretch from my perspective. But anyway, I think that we're going to keep on playing with testing this and seeing how far we can push it. We'll keep on sending some updates as we build this kit. But over the next 2 weeks, we're continuing to improve the kit. Again, the goal here is to use ambisonic as a way to the ambisonic source, and then converting it back to surround as a way to create atmosphere. So even though it sounds crazy to be doing this at a convention and doing interviews and everything else with 5.1, we feel like it's going to make it more immersive for those people that can hear it. It's going to be a more immersive experience. And because we're using two mics with, a lot of off-axis rejection, we can send them down the center and then have the other ones kind of filling the space, having the surround kind of fill the space out. So that's our goal. We're going to be working on this for the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep on giving you updates during the show as we kind of move forward. Coming up in the rest of the week, we have tomorrow we're going to talk about video framing. So today we're talking about sound. Tomorrow we're going to talk about video framing and what it means and how do we use it to tell a story. So we'll be talking about video framing tomorrow and how we use it. Also on Friday we'll be talking more nuts and bolts about carnets. How do we get our equipment in and out of every country? This is something that usually when you get started it seems like a mystery, and once you get used to it, it's pretty obvious. But we're going to have Boomerang actually come in. They're the ones that I've used the most for that. On Saturday, we're going to be brainstorming accessibility. So we've had the last couple weeks, we've had deaf panelists, ASL. We've been talking about a lot of things all through the summer in accessibility. And so we're going to be brainstorming on where do we go next? What else do we want to add to our accessibility conversations? And of course, Sunday is our day of introspection. So if you've got questions about what we're doing in office hours and what we're doing in this industry, that's the day to come and ask those questions. We don't put that out. We don't record it. We just kind of It's an internal conversation amongst ourselves as best we can. And also take a look at our announcements inside of Discord. We decided, Twitter just put out communities yesterday, and we were like, hey, what does this look like? And the best thing to do is just turn one on and see what happens. I guess it's not Twitter anymore, it's X. So I don't know. I don't know if we're going to use it. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're researching it because that's what we do. So we're researching what it looks like. There's probably 35 or 40 people that jumped in last night. And I don't know what we're going to do, but if you want to jump in and be part of that, take a look for the link in Discord. All right, we are jumping to our second hour, and I'm really, really excited to have Rob Bridgett here. Rob Bridgett is a British-Canadian audio director, mix supervisor, sound designer, and recordist based in Newfoundland. He has worked as an audio director in the games industry since 2001, Vivendi Games, Activision Blizzard, Square Enix, PlayStation, and Robert has become committed advocate to sound in video games, and his new book is called Working with Sound. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Alex. Hey. How are you?
Hey,
great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see you again. How did you get into game design or sound design for games?
It was quite a circuitous route, to be honest. It was I started off initially kind of studying cinema and studying film at university, and I did a master's degree in sound for film over at Bournemouth University. So my route was always, I think, in my head at that time into cinema sound and sound design for films. And it just turned out that the course that I was on was a very collaborative sort of course, very vocational course. And I shared a house as well with lots of animation students and did a lot of sound work for those students on their reels and things like that. And so got to know them very well. And a lot of those animators went into video games, into the games industry. And so as these things often happen, all the sort of reach outs and connections that I'd heard about for jobs that were available were actually through the video game side of things.
So did you do any cinema work, or did you go straight into games?
I tried to get into film. I tried, the route in was usually a runner, usually a place in Soho or company in Soho, and a lot of my colleagues from the film sound course did that route. And then, but yeah, I didn't end up going or doing any film work, but I just went straight into games, which was actually, looking back on it, was sort of at least for me, it was the sort of perfect time to be there in that industry when things were, and they still are, very dynamic, and they still are changing all the time. But I think even back then, it was quite a rarity to be hired as a sort of full-time sound designer on a video game team. And so essentially you had to create and make everything yourself, like the methods of playback, the entire game engine had to be sort of developed, from scratch in-house. And so you were basically building the tracks as you went along, like that sort of famous Wallace and Gromit gif of building the train tracks. It always felt like that. And I guess it still does feel like that. Yeah.
I was actually a sound design. I designed sounds for a game in the early 90s. And
wow.
I was, but when I say sound designer, I literally made all the games at my desk, like sat there and the transporter was like, and then I go in and I'd stretch it and move it around and stick it all in. But it was like, everything was done at my desk for one little game. What was your first game? What did you first work?
The very first title that I worked on was it was an Xbox, the original Xbox title. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. That was the in-house stuff. I mean, previous to going in-house, I worked at a small sort of post-production company who were outsourced to do work on a video game,
right?
But, just the sound effects portion, and that was called Vanishing Point, and it was a racing game for the Dreamcast console. I don't know if you recall that, but that was So the two game developers for that title came in to the post-production facility, and I was kind of the new hire who had come from the course in Bournemouth, and it's like, here's our sound designer. Everyone else here is a composer. Here's the sound designer we've just hired, and then they just locked me in a room with the development team, and we made all the user interface sounds together, like live. We had the game running so we could see what the sounds, the style, the visual style of the game as well. So that was the first game that I'd worked on, but the first in-house role that I'd had was working on a game called Sudeki, Sudeki, which was a sort of Japanese style RPG. But yeah, it was like a Xbox exclusive, sort of original, the very first Xbox title. But yeah, I was working for a company called Climax Entertainment down on the south coast in the UK. They'd hired me to, kind of they'd heard a demo reel of some music that I'd done, and it caught the ear of their game designer. But then I was sort of hired as their sound designer / audio engineer / audio director. I mean, the titles weren't even sort of figured out back then either. So it was more like, what do you want to be called when we sort of hire you? So I think I sort of settled on sound designer because of the Walter Murch kind of definition of that, where it was sort of responsibility for the overall soundtrack, which was definitely what I was jumping into. But yeah.
And so that's where you started. What was the last game you worked on?
The last game I worked on that's been published would have probably been, it's probably Shadow of the Tomb Raider from Eidos, Square Enix Montreal. I mean, games take so long to develop that you can start working on something and then you won't see it. Sometimes if you move to another gig, you might not see that title. It might never see the light of day, but it's 3 to 5 years is a typical sort of gestation period for a game these days. So,
and is that three? And when you say 3 to 5 years, is that 3 to 5 years for the game, the sound design as well, or are you what part of that pipeline do you fit into?
So I think that's one of the really fascinating areas to talk about, actually, which is where sound gets involved and how sound people integrate into game development teams. Because like I was sort of describing, coming from that sort of film post-production background and learning about sound through that lens, it gives you this sort of expectation that, you're going to be handed things that are pretty much finished visually or in terms of, I know you're laughing there now already, but yeah, we know the problems with that idea. But I think that still persists a little bit, that idea that, you want to work on something from a sound perspective that's as close to finished as possible, so you can get the feeling of it and understand what it's about at the very end, and then be able to, sort of come in and apply the sound to that. Whereas with video games, because it's a software development environment, primarily, and it's changing as well. The industry's sort of becoming more focused on entertainment as well, so it's more like software entertainment these days. But yeah, I think being involved right from day one on a project, from the concept phase of an initial idea, it's a place that sound people aren't very familiar being, actually. I think it's one of the areas that I've learned a lot of, like, what to do and what not to do, and even how to think about sound and try to insert it into the game development process earlier and more frequently, and be able to come up with a sort of so that the whole team understands that sound is part of that process.
Do you ever make requests in the game of visuals that would that would make a great sound?
Yeah, that sometimes happens. I mean, particularly with animation. I mean, this happens in cinema too, I believe. Mm-hmm. But I think if you do some pre-pro work or some early sound recording, perhaps of animals or of creature voices, just to a concept sketch or something like that, then that sound work can influence and inspire animators as they're working and as they're sort of trying to find a cadence or a rhythm, or because I think in the visual realm sometimes it's really hard to work in time.
Right.
Whereas with what sound automatically brings is a sense of time and a sense of, the sort of cadence and personality through that stuff. So I think it's something early sound work is very inspirational, I think, for cross-discipline teams, and to, even just to be able to dream about a world that you're sort of creating and hear it.
Yeah. Do you sometimes find yourself like creating ambience for them, like just an ambient, some ambient thing, so while they're working, they can,
Yeah.
I worked at Lucasfilm and in the Star Wars art department, and the guys when we were working on the pod race, the modelers had P-51 races going on. And it was, I guess they do them in Vegas or something like that. You just hear these P-51s, just to get them into the mood.
Yeah, to understand the energy and the excitement, I think, of what they're working on. I mean, that's a great tool and a great technique for sound to be able to participate in that creative process, rather than be something that's sort of applied as a decoration at the end. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope to work early with teams and to sort of, especially with creative directors and art directors. I've had some of the best sort of collaborative relationships I've had in video games have been through, those kinds of leaders, and to sort of partner with them and explore the world together with them. That's very, very satisfying. And because it's so early, there's no sort of wrong thing to do. You're all sort of exploring these ideas together. And so, yeah, I found that just having like 2 or 3 options of things where you're looking at a concept image, or even if the creative director is just sort of stood up in front of everyone and explained, part of the story or something about the world or about the gameplay and about how it should feel. It's often great to go away with that inspiration, quickly work on something or 2 or 3 different things over the course of maybe a few hours or a couple of days, and then be able to sit the creative director down, put on the headphones or listen in the theater together at some of those sketches, and just get sort of a feel. And sometimes the creative director will fall in love with it and be like, yes, this is beyond what I imagined it to be.
And that sometimes that might even drive that scene, right? Or drive that part of the game.
Yeah. Well, I think early on you're working often away from the details of something, right? Mm-hmm. It's more, I found it very, very high level, very emotional, more about feeling than about sort of, details. Very, very broad sort of brush strokes in a way. So being able to sort of supply some of that for the team, and through music as well, like bringing in composers a lot earlier to work in that same way, try to come up with some themes, some ideas, some textures, some feelings. Yeah.
When you get brought onto a game to work on it, where does it start? Like what happens first?
Ideally, it is those early concept phases where you are brought. I mean, you can be brought on at any point, really. So, like in Tomb Raider, I was brought on very, very early, like to the tail end of the concept phase, which was really, really fantastic. So I got to explore a lot of the big sort of themes like fear and kind of loss and all these sort of things. So getting to work at that level, it's something that once you've got it in the DNA, once you've found the DNA of that, then you can carry that through to the details, like all the way to the end of the project. But you could equally be brought in at a sort of end of pre-production or even later, So things get more complex there. But the first sort of things to do, at least from a creative standpoint, are those big sort of ideas. But at the same time, you've got all the sort of technologies that you're going to use, all the, how are you going to play back sound in this game? What audio tools or middleware are you going to use? Or are you going to write your own sort of way of doing that?
And you've been a proponent of the, approaching it with surround and immersive audio and so on and so forth. And how do you build for that, inside of a game? Is that something that it seems like something you have to kind of decide you're going to do almost from the beginning?
Yeah, it does help if you know that in advance, because I think it completely changes the way you think about how sound works in a game. If it's Tomb Raider again is a great example, because that particular Tomb Raider game was the 3rd in the series, and we'd added like a vertical rope rappel feature in that particular game. So verticality was suddenly this new thing that was important in that game. So around sort of late pre-production, early production, we managed to get Dolby Atmos working on the console, and so this was like, okay, this is fantastic. And we now have overhead space to play with. And it's accessible to everyone because there's the headphone version of it as well. So we weren't too worried about, oh, this is just going to be a feature for
using a binaural fold down for that.
Yeah, I think that Dolby Atmos technology does that for you. So essentially, what we started doing was, it was a lot of jungle environments in that game, and a lot of sort of, propelled down into spaces or up above. We started to place sounds in 3D around the environment in the game engine, just to sort of entice the player to look up or think about what was above. So that was really fundamental.
And you talk a lot about leading with sound. In fact, you have a book called that. What does that mean?
I think it's something that everyone is sort of looking for, really, because sound is traditionally, I always think of it as just in the wake of the ship, is always trying to catch up, and is always trying to is never sort of the decision maker often in the process, and is always just sort of trying to fix things, or trying to decisions that have been made up in the control room of the ship are affecting everything behind it. So I think when you're on a project, often it can feel like you're just sort of struggling, and this whole thing that you'd worked on with the team for 3 months has now been cut, and so it's now you're doing something else. So there's big decisions happening all the time. So I think there's for me, the idea of leading with sound is firstly about trying to get into that room where these decisions are being made, and to be able to, understand that stuff, and then be able to communicate that in a more effective way down to the sound team itself. But secondly, I think, leading with sound is about, as we'd sort of hinted at before, that idea of post-production, where things are kind of settled and you have a good foundation and you know what you're working on. There's so much sound work to do early in pre-production or prototyping on game features and things like that sound people, I think, need to be working a lot more in those worlds and understanding what it is that they're trying to do, because it's a completely different way of working in a prototype sort of situation than it is to a final polished sort of product. So there's certain ways of looking at that work, and sort of different expectations and different quality expectations at that level as well.
And the new book right now is called Working with Sound. And where does that take us where did you go with this book?
Yeah, Working with Sound. So I think that was more about the changes that came about because of the pandemic, and how we, as sort of game developers and sound designers, we're now in this more remote world or global world, or however you.
And how's that worked for you? I mean, we've moved to, because a lot of us, this community is all remote. So we build this whole the show here. I mean, you met some folks on the way through. Yeah. The show is being edited by a person somewhere else in the world. All of the stuff is happening. It's probably 2 or 3 continents at any given time for every show every morning. So we're kind of used to this, but it must have been a huge shift as COVID hit, because it happened pretty suddenly. And how did you adjust for that?
Yeah, I think, well, this is one of the interesting things, I think, that audio people have, over the last 20 years in game development, have initially started in studios in kind of siloed spaces, away from the rest of the team, because we're making sounds and noise all day and we don't want to disturb people on the floor. Right. Or
have them disturb you, by getting anywhere near you while you're recording.
Equally as terrible, yeah. However, as time has gone by, I think the sound people have come out of those rooms and realized that, actually, probably at least 33% of our day is more of a collaborative part of the process of working in games. So being able to sit with the design team or sit in on those design meetings and throw in ideas and just sort of be part of the game development team is
and now that it's virtualized, how are you doing it over Zoom? Are you doing it over other tools? How do you make that work?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's virtualized. I mean, in many ways, it makes it a lot easier to have someone kind of sit with you at your desk and listen to something together. If you want to work with a creative director, I guess the challenge is still trying to get the time of these people and, you know, sort of get that in there and moving meetings around and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, knowing that they're listening on headphones is huge, because previously it would be come to my desk, let's listen to something together, or let's book out the mix room and listen to it there if it's something we really want to focus on. So
and do you mostly build sound for games for headsets? I mean, that's pretty much probably what the vast majority of users are. That's how they're enjoying the game.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely something we're always aware of, always thinking about is, you know, what's the sort of most common like playback method, which has been one of the amazing things about the spatial audio sort of thing that's happened in the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years. That sort of technology's really like exploded, and it's kind of everywhere, and everyone's doing their own sort of version of that. But yeah, I think what that brings to sort of headphone users is this, you know, pretty exciting sense of space and immersion, which you could only really previously have by sitting in a pretty amazing room with a great home theater system. And
right.
there were people out there, players out there who had those rooms for sure. But
and all their neighbors knew when they were playing.
Yeah. The whole street probably knew, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Courtney, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Rob. I've always had some questions about, you know, being involved in sound production and post-production for years with, you know, standard film and television. Sound post-production, you get a locked picture, so you know the timing of the sound effects that are needed, and you know how to produce the sound effects that synchronize the picture. I was wondering how in gameplay, since it's variable, you know, you can have three things blow up at one time, or one thing blows up, and, you know, gunshots. How is synchronization handled when you're designing these sounds? Do you design for a specific sequence? Do they give you a cut sequence or an edited sequence so that you know how fast a gun is going to fire, or how fast an explosion's going to take place, and if there's going to be glass clinking down in different areas or not? Do you work off of a pre-rendered animation to get the timing right, or do you just generate a lot of individual elements that are then synchronized by the render engine in the game? How does synchronization work? That's my question. I know, of course, there's dialogue lines that are pre-recorded that are synchronized, but other than that, the sound effects.
Well, I think, and it's quite complicated because of the iterative nature of game development. I mean, essentially, the synchronization comes through firing off a sound event in the game engine. So in the same way that you would trigger an animation event, you would attach a sound event to that as well. So like play this particular kind of sound, and that's how it would be synchronized. You know, maybe it's on a button press, like a weapon firing or something like that. So the animation of the weapon fires, and you have the sound as well. However, that's the really simple fundamental part of it. The really difficult part is trying to keep up with the iteration cycle, because that first version of the gunshot that's gone in is probably some kind of placeholder, and
we made the gun even bigger. Yeah,
it's going to get bigger for like month by month, and then it's either going to get cut completely, or it's going to suddenly fit into the scale of all the other weapons. So it's always going to be changing. Or maybe the look of the gun is now completely different. Like it has a lot more detail to it, and there are things happening on the weapon that are sort of spring-loaded mechanisms. So you want to continually evolve that sound.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just wondering, do you create a lot of different layers so that you mix it up so that the sound, you don't hear a repetitive, you don't hear the same sound over and over again for each explosion, so that it has multiple layers that you can mix and match.
Yes.
So it makes it much more varied.
I mean, that's a more modern sort of technique of creating sound effects for games now in the last sort of 15 to 20 years. I'd say previous to that, it was more like a one sound that played that was designed to sort of do everything. Whereas now, like you said, the layers are really, really critical to that, because There could be distance involved in the sound, so it could have detail layers that they're only audible when it's close to you, or it could have a completely different sound when it's far away as well. But also like the variety, the randomization of different sounds to make it feel more natural and realistic. I mean, it will often create, like, for something as simple as a footstep or a weapon shot, like either between 15 and 20 variations for every single one of those sort of sounds that plays, and even within every layer there could be that amount of variations as well.
Do you find yourself wanting to go back and re-record, like you've listened to them and you play the game and then you've just decided that there's a couple of those footsteps or a couple of those gunshots you just have to go back and do again? Like you just I don't like these anymore.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I mean, you're continually reviewing this stuff, like either with the director team or with your audio team. So there's always the opportunity to go in there and tweak something and change something, which is dangerous, but also very, very helpful, let's say. So yeah, I mean, one way I think it'd be good to just talk you through this sort of image here. Yeah. Hopefully you can see that, but this is sort of a way of thinking about the layers, the different sort of passes on sound that we'll tend to do. Mm-hmm. And so it's a simple L scale effectively. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of, L0 is just a concept thing that you're working on offline outside the game engine. But once you're inside that game engine and working on sounds, placing sounds in the game and triggering them, you sort of need to set expectations about what the quality is going to be on those different sections. So an L1 pass for us is just a very bare basic functionality. It's just to give the player or the person who's testing the game or designing that feature some basic feedback. Like, okay, I press the trigger, I hear the weapon shooting sound. That's great that's positive feedback, or maybe there's some negative feedback that I need.
Do you start a lot with those, like an L1 of taking stuff from your library or other libraries, just throwing things in rather than spending a lot of time on them?
Yeah, exactly. The most important part about that L1 phase is velocity. It's speed. Right. So to get something in like I said, this is almost a prototyping stage of game features. So they're not going to look amazing either, which is good. They might not sound like fantastic. And so, yeah, like the speed at which you can get things in, just test it out, and then review it together with the team. And it's like, oh, okay, this feels too big, or this feels too small, or the rhythm's kind of weird on this. We can play with those sort of elements, those feedback elements, in this L1 phase. And like I said, like a lot of the prototyping that happens in games, this stuff will just get continually thrown out until we find something that really works well and feels like super fun on the sticks, and it feels good. So once that magic starts to coalesce, the feature kind of gets like the prototype becomes a bit more solid, and it becomes sort of signed off and approved, and then you're kind of safe to move into this L2 phase from a sound point of view, where you can really focus then on the identity. So it's not as much about the library stuff anymore, the generic stuff. It's more like, okay, what does this character sound like? What is the feel of this? And you might have already done a lot of that work in L0, like in the concept phase. So you may have some style guides and some examples of stuff there. But yeah, L2 is essentially where, if you're working on a Star Wars game, that's where the lightsabers are going to come in and the iconic sort of sounds. Or if it's a new IP that you're developing, those are the kind of iconic sounds you want to try and get in there at that stage. Like I said, we're still in flux. There's still stuff changing here. So we don't want to polish it yet, but we just want to get the real sort of feel to it. And then, so that's what gets you to the sort of L3, which is the shippable stage, basically. So that's the polish pass. That's where, all the features are starting to become properly locked down. These are the bits that we know are going to be in the game. And so that's where you're really shifting your attention onto all those layers and all that detail. And just being able to spend as much time reviewing and polishing that stuff as possible. And then the L4 is really it's a very, very tiny amount of time at the end of a project, where, the rest of the team is kind of left the building, and the game might even be on the disc at this point. So the mix might not even make it onto the disc that you buy in the store. The mix might be something that comes through a day one patch or a day zero patch, because it's a small amount of data, essentially, different levels and things like that. So that is the kind of only
That's
real
great.
post bit that we tend to do. So
That's fantastic.
So yeah, those sort of L levels help us to, take the pressure off that quality needing to be there in the earliest days as well, because I think as sound designers, we all want to do amazing work and we want it to sound fantastic all the time. However, if you're pushing to get like a sound with feedback and with identity and with polish on a gray block prototype, that's a lot of work you've got to throw away, so again, it's about trying to move as fast as possible and set expectations very early on for that stuff.
Let's jump into the questions from our producers.
First one comes from J.J. McKenna in San Rafael, California. How much game sound is created within the industry versus getting outside contractors and specialists who are professionals?
So like from internal teams who are employed at game developers. Yeah. Okay. And well, it's a very, very healthy ecosystem, I would say, because mostly there's a sound designer or a sound team or audio director in-house, employed full-time as part of a game development team, usually on each project that's being done at that company. So there are, I'd say that generally tend not to be massive teams, but they're there for those early pre-production concepts and most of production. I think what tends to happen is production, and this is on very big AAA sort of projects that I'm talking about here, will tend to bring in like teams of vendors or contractors to sort of help out and beef the team up kind of in production and late production, just to get all the content done. And so in the sort of end of L2 to L3 stages, that's where the team will grow, usually quite dynamically, and that's often through contractors and vendors. So I think there's a really good balance of these different sort of ways of working. Yeah.
Next question.
Mickey Makachor in Manila in the Philippines up next. How has developing and designing in Atmos changed your workflow compared to 5.1 or 7.1? Is it the same amount of work but with more creative freedom, or is there much additional work required?
I would say it's integrating Atmos at this point in time is fairly seamless. It's fairly easy to do. It's mostly handled by the audio middleware, such as like Audio Kinetics Wise is a very popular audio middleware solution. And essentially it's a matter of setting the output to Atmos in that sense. But yeah, basically it's the same way as handling, you still have place sound objects in 3D in the environment, in the game engine. And those, as you move the camera around and the sounds are panned automatically, depending on that. What Atmos actually brings to the table and other sort of 3D audio technologies bring to the table is the sense of overhead space, which I think in games is really interesting, because you can actually have sounds, off-screen sounds that are above the player or behind the player that don't distract the player in the same way that they may distract an audience in a sort of cinema. I always remember the old adage of not playing a sound that's too distracting in the surrounds or the overheads in a theater, just because the audience is going to look around and see if they could see what caused the sound, and they'll see, don't look at the exit sign, I think was the sort of idea behind that. But with games and players and that audience, they're very 3D native. So if they hear a sound above them, they're going to move the camera and look at what caused the sound, or they're going to spin around in the game and see what's behind them. So there's a whole different sort of 3D aware audience that you can really play with. So you can put a lot of enticers in 3D space. But yeah, like I was saying, I think spectacle is another one of those things where that overhead height can be really, really fantastic in a mix, in a particular moment in a game, where you sort of suspend and break the usual rules and just sort of do something special and spectacular in the overheads. I think that's really great. So it's difficult as well, because I think you have to balance 3D sound all the time. If you're using overheads all the time, you're using that space continuously, it does tend to become kind of ordinary after a while. If you've been in that world, you've been playing that game for a while, it becomes kind of normal. So I still look at it as a place where you want to do special things and just sort of remind the player how fantastic that experience is.
Next question.
JJ McKenna in San Rafael, California is up next. He says, how much compression is required for objects not within earshot? And he references not Schrodinger's cat, but Schrodinger's falling tree.
How much compression? Well, there's two kinds of compression. There's the compressed size of the file, or there's the sort of runtime compression. I guess I'll talk about both. Essentially sounds that are ready to play but aren't playing yet, which are kind of on the periphery of your 3D kind of world. Those basically become virtual voices. So they're sounds that are ready to play but they're not playing anything yet. And as you approach those sounds, they basically get loaded and turned on, and then the volume starts to increase. So it's a lot of that streaming is handled in the audio engine with the sort of audio. The audio programmers take care of a lot of that stuff and ensure that all scales nicely. But obviously, there's very, very distant sounds like huge explosions that you want to hear and you want to be audible. So those are quite special cases where, and maybe that is more low frequency sound as well. I guess with compression, or this file size compression, it's not really a problem anymore because we have these very sophisticated loading and streaming technologies that, can essentially handle all the sound coming in and out. I mean, 20 years ago, you couldn't do that because you were streaming the thing off a disk, which had a very limited streaming bandwidth. Whereas now, essentially, every sound is installed on the SSD and ready to play. So, yeah.
Do you find yourself compressing the audio itself to make it more present? Not so much file compression, but just
right. I think there's a case to be made for some mild compression, purely because I think too much dynamic range can be a problem, because especially in games, because like very, very quiet moments. You could be in an open world style game and you could be just exploring a very quiet area of the game for quite a long time, and you'd probably adjust your volume at home according to that, and then you're going to go into a combat sequence which is going to tear the roof off. So I think there's a good cut, and often what we'll do is we'll have an audio option in the audio menu, which is essentially like a dynamic range or 3 preset dynamic range settings, where it's like high dynamic range, which is more for home theaters. So you get that, you have a good sort of, I guess, somewhere like around a 15 LU loudness range, LRA.
Right.
But I think when you're on headphones or when you play more quietly, I think that feels better around a 12 sort of LRA loudness range. So, and again, that compression, if it's added, is added on a kind of master bus at the very end of the chain. Of course, you can have compression at any node within your bus structure. So you could have a particular flavor of compression on dialogue, or even on a particular character within the dialogue sort of busing structure. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity there, actually.
And is the busing structure in a game similar to a mixer? I mean, do you have a series of buses that these are all running on, and positions? Or how does that fit in?
I would say every game sets it up completely differently, because you want to control different groups of sounds for different titles. Like a first-person shooter would have really different mix criteria to like a 2D platformer game or a mobile game or something like that. So you can essentially set up the bus structure however you want. I mean, normally it'll be a master bus with like VO, SFX, and music, and then sub bus groups for every category underneath that. So you could have like NPC characters underneath the dialogue bus, or you could have like the player character. You could have like barks and just sort of shout outs for combat from enemies as a separate bus, and very important lines of dialogue like story dialogue could be a separate bus category as well. And the reason to do that is just so that you can decide to turn one category of sound down and get it out of the way when another category plays. So there's a real deck of cards, like stack of cards sort of thing, where everything's interrelated and there's a lot of complexity there with the mix for sure.
Absolutely. Courtney?
Yeah, I was going to ask if the acoustical environment is rendered by the game engine at the last minute. So do you create the sound effects dry and then let the render engine, or the audio render engine, render the acoustics by applying echo or reverb, depending upon the location that you're in. If you're in a cave or in an abandoned cityscape or out in the desert, it would apply different levels of reverberation. Would apply depending upon, I assume, your position in the game. Do you create all the sound effects dry? Really, is that the question? And let the render engine calculate the environment and then position as far as in Dolby Atmos. So
any category of sound which is going to be like happening throughout the game in multiple locations in a 3D game is always going to be dry, and you're going to create volumes in the game engine for a particular space that has a particular reverb zone in it, and that's essentially what you're going to move between as you go through the different environments. So the reverbs are going to be applied at runtime for those sounds. However, if you have like a one-off sound that's like a distant triggered sound that's always going to be distant, and it's always going to be far away, like some distant explosion, you want to hear that bouncing off the environment. You always know the context in which it's going to occur. That can often be baked into the sound file itself. So there's still definitely a hybrid of those two approaches.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Mickey Makachor again in the Philippines. In the film world, there are many compromises that have to be made to make things work when going from surround down to the stereo mix. In the gaming world, what do you find is the most difficult compromises to make and elements to cut?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, we have so many different endpoints in video games. There's ambisonic output. There's the Dolby Atmos 714 sort of channel-based output. There's the stereo down mix 5.1, 7.1. It's just endless. And then on different platforms, there's lots of different options as well. So you could have different endpoints on a PC. A PlayStation console could be different from an Xbox console. Nintendo Switch, very different again. So I think ideally what we're looking for is to mix and create the sound mix for the game at the highest possible available resolution, and to have that sort of idea of a mezzanine format that does fold down very nicely as you go down into the stereo mix and so on. However, there are a lot of, sometimes we find these sort of strange rules in there. Sometimes like some down mix or summing is done differently on a different platform. So we'll find a problem with that, usually just through listening to it, and then dig into the code and find out what's going on with that mix down. And often we have to compensate for that sometimes. So it's getting better. Like the fold downs and mix downs are generally starting to follow pretty predictable rules now. So again, like ideally we mix in the highest possible sort of listening format together, and then we're able to check things on headphones and check things on on a stereo sort of system, or even on a TV speaker, just to make sure that the experience is still coming across, even though it doesn't have those additional sort of speakers.
Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand said, how hard is it to put retro sounds from games like Galaga or Gyrus into new games with respect to copyright? Is there an open source library with Creative Commons licenses or the like, or do you have to pay royalties, or maybe both?
Yeah, I do not know the answer to this, but I would have to guess I would stay away from it, legally speaking, or I would, if it's something you had to do because you were, you were remaking Space Invaders, you probably have the license for that anyway. So you'd be talking to the license holder, or you'd be having those conversations at some point, or you'd be trying to get a new sound or design a new sound that sort of had an essence or a flavor of that original.
And in some ways, that gives you a lot more, you can go a lot more places with it. When it was created back then, I think there's a new interactive Space Invaders that I haven't gotten to download yet.
Yeah, there is. But yeah, the sound on that I think is completely different too. Yeah, because the game is completely different. Yeah. But yeah, like some essence of the original is going to be necessary, I think, for those players who remember that. You remember how they felt when they first played those games, for sure. But yeah, I would generally try and avoid just grabbing sounds from the internet, because you don't know where they're really from or who really owns the copyright on those things.
Next question.
Next one comes from JJ McKenna in San Rafael, California. Is there any coding required by sound producers to attach the audio to character movements specifically?
Yes, there usually is a lot of code, a lot of systems that are developed on that side of things. Again, like usually the great thing about video games is that you're working as part of a team, so you don't necessarily have to learn how to do absolutely everything yourself, unless you are creating a game sort of from scratch on your own. But yeah, usually you'll come up with that idea of what if we just attach sound to an elbow movement or elbow velocity, and we, instead of having to tag every single animation, we just switch it on and it generates the sound for us. You would basically explain that to an audio programmer or a programmer, and do some sort of prototypes of what you're looking to change, like the volume and the sort of pitch maybe a little bit. You could mock that up in a DAW and sort of explain the concept, and then you could sort of move that to a runtime sort of prototype where the sound, like maybe it's a Foley sound that's continually playing, but as the elbow moves, the volume goes up and down based on the velocity of the elbow or whatever it is. So again, like I think collaborating with teams is fundamental to game development, and I think those kinds of ideas, when they pop up, it's not something you need to learn to do necessarily yourself, but you can excitedly run into the programmer's office or Zoom window and explain what you're after, and they should be able to help you with that.
Next question.
Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado asks, is there an audio version of motion blur, sound in the player view over time, possibly in the form of an impulse response, maybe a measure of player injury or something like that?
There might, yeah. I mean, I think modifying sound at runtime is something that happens in every game engine. I mean, it's all done in very different ways. It's not a particular technique or a particular software that does that. But yeah, being able to foreground certain categories of sound or filter them out. Like low health is that perfect example, right? Where you're about to die. You're just about to take the last bullet, but you're going to filter out all the ambient sound, all the ambient background sound. You're going to put a low pass filter on that.
That kind of is like the buses that you're talking about. That allows you to take those and affect those as your health is going down.
Yeah, and maybe the character's breathing isn't affected like that, so it becomes more prominent, and you can add some delay to that as well in that specific moment. So once you know what state you want to do something in, you can have that as long as that state is triggered at low health. Health reaches a certain point, trigger this state. You can do a lot of crazy stuff to the different categories of audio at runtime at that point. So yeah, you can make things really clear or pop out of the mix. You can make things really muddy and distant. Any kind of audio processing that you can do sort of on the plugin sort of side, you can pretty much do at runtime. So yeah, there's a lot of scope for that sort of stuff in those moments. Yeah.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, for someone with experience with audio productions and who is detail-oriented in their way of thinking, how can one enter the game sound industry?
Yeah, that's always a tricky topic.
The perennial question. How do I get in?
Yeah, how do I get out? Is a good one to answer.
That's the next one. That comes a couple years in. Versus how do I get in? Then it's how do I stay in? And then it's how do I get out?
I can't leave. I can't do anything else. Yeah. No, it's the best advice I can sort of give is this idea of because game development isn't all about, it's not all about one particular thing. It's quite a generalist skill set, I would say, is needed. It's a very collaborative and very iterative, way of working and way of making things. So I think those L levels I showed earlier to your detail-oriented piece of your brain is going to be really lit up in every one of those places, because there are different things to think about in each one of those areas. However, I'd say essentially thinking about, and I'm going to just show another slide really quickly here, here we go. Just share screen. So you should be able to see this. This is essentially how, and it's from a quote from Randy Tom, where he was asked about what's the typical working day like for a sound designer. And, he said it was essentially 33% creative, 33% like technical or craft. And then the other 33% is like collaborative and interacting with other disciplines. So for me, that was like, I have to visualize this. This is like a really perfect way of summing up how we work in video games. So you're going to spend, you develop this technical sort of aspect first as a way of doing things and making things happen. Because the creative part is great to develop as you go, because I think once you get ideas, you have to be able to put them on screen. You have to be able to, to actually do the technical work to put that stuff on screen. And then the collaborative part is something you're gonna be continually throwing out ideas, listening to other people's ideas, trying those out, presenting them. Those are skills. This is the sort of ideal generalist skill set, I think. So any project that you can work on that sort of has a balance of these things, I think that's super valuable to talk about whenever you interact with people who might be, a gatekeeper or someone in an interview. I think those are the sort of things that we're looking for, really, because there's so many like really amazingly gifted technical people out there, particularly in the sound world, who, really have trouble when it comes to collaborating, or really, aren't quite as ready with creative ideas or the ability to throw that stuff out there. So there, I think I'd say basing your skill sets on these three things is probably a good idea for the games industry specifically.
Good, Courtney.
Now, relating to the skill set question, I was wondering, how much of your work consists of actually going out with a recorder in the field and recording actual sounds, and how much of it is just editorial work of taking existing library sounds and modifying them, and then how much of your work is synthesizing sounds, creating sounds from scratch with synthesizers or some other electronic device to create the sound, original sound, and then modify it.
Yeah, I think,
does it involve all of those skills?
It can do, yeah, and it often does. I think it really depends on the project that you're working on. If it's more of a sci-fi type thing, then of course you're going to lean more into that synthesis realm of, creating a sound world. You might spend a lot of time, that's where you create and generate the sound source. If it's something, the Tomb Raider game I mentioned before was set in South American sort of jungle. You needed the actual source sounds of those exact like birds and howler monkeys and things like that to make that jungle feel like it was the actual place that you were putting on screen. So I didn't go to the jungle. I sort of committed. I
would have told them, I'm sorry, I'm the only one that can do this. Yeah, I have to be able to hear it while I'm doing it.
Well, that's what I wondered. Are there a certain group of people you hire production sound recorders to go out and
exactly.
ambient sounds for you, or does one person a lot of times bounce between editorial and field recording?
It does happen in any of those things. Like if you're a particular kind of audio director, for example, or sound designer who's really wants to go to this location and wants to record those sounds and hear what it's like and feel what it's like, probably more importantly to feel what it's like, and as much as gathering reference is to sort of understand, like, what does dusk feel like in this jungle environment, or how do sounds change over time. So I think that's more important to bring back to something like a game, because then you can turn those into systems and play the right sounds based on that. But yeah, I mean, sound recording, it can be a big part of it because you want to get authenticity in a particular game for sure. But then there's the editorial part, of course, and all the categorization. Often you're building libraries for a particular project as well. So, that could be location-based stuff, or it could be Foley-based stuff that's done in a studio. It could be a whole physics collision system that you need all different impacts on different surfaces to account for different objects being moved around. So you'd want to record all that content and then edit it and categorize it and have it play back in a systemic way. So yeah, I mean, the exciting part is there you can kind of do a bit of everything, really. Yeah.
Next question.
Mickey McAchore, back from the Philippines. I don't want to start a religious discussion here, he notes, but in your opinion, how many footstep samples are sufficient for each primary character per surface?
Right. Yeah. Take your pick. I mean, it's definitely more than 10 for me. It's I think anytime you notice one of those repeating steps, that it sort of breaks the immersion. I think footsteps are very hard to get right because I think the more variety you can have in there, the better. Honestly, just the more organic, because the sounds that are going to go, you're going to hear it from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. No matter what bit of the game you're in, you're probably going to be hearing those character footsteps. So you're probably going to invest a lot more time into the amount of content, the variety that's happening there than you are for like a specific, enemy that occurs at a particular level, like further on down in the game. So yeah, I would go pretty high on those footstep numbers just to avoid that one clop sound that it just keeps bugging you. That's another great thing about working on these things for a long time, because things bug you over those 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
You're like,
I can't think that. And it seems like the dynamic range you have to be kind of careful of, because I know when we're doing visuals, when I look at a texture, I go, oh, I can't have that pattern in there, because you'll just see it, repeating. And I guess audio in some ways is the same.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And, like those bus categorizations, getting the character footsteps slightly out of the way when some things are happening as well.
Yeah.
And then I guess transients in footsteps, transient sounds, right. the initial attack sound can become quite harsh. And if you're turning things down, you still hear that. You still hear only that transient sound, and you lose the sort of the detail and the character of the body of the sound. So yeah, there's a lot of that stuff you've got to play with and continually adapt and until they take you off the project and say you can't work on it.
We often say in visual effects, we often say you never finish a shot, you just run out of time.
Yeah, you just get taken off it.
Yeah. Next question.
Yeah. Next question is actually mine. I was wondering, Movie Sound is famous for working with temp tracks, including music and sound effects. Do you use a similar process in game sound design? Do you temp things before you do them?
I think a lot of that temp stuff can happen in the concept phase, where you work, you're not really working in the game engine. You're just working on sort of movie renders and Rippomatic things, just to sort of get an idea of this is the tone maybe we're thinking for this title. So and you'll find a piece of music from something else that sort of gets you in the ballpark of that world. So I've seen that used quite a lot in concept phase. But then, like I said, as soon as you start to get into that on-screen world, like it's about just putting in sounds. Maybe it's from a library, or putting stuff in very quickly, just to sort of get a feel for it. Again, like grabbing a temp sound, a temp piece of music at the very end of like a major milestone, just to get it to feel the way that the director sort of has in their minds. Can happen. It is very dangerous to do that, just in the same way it's dangerous to do that in linear media, because of the love that can happen. Once you've met that milestone, and it's like, this is it, and then unfortunately that can then be given as instructions to a composer, or like, we want it to feel like this piece of music. One thing I started doing fairly recently was just to try and and bring in the composer early enough that they can essentially create temp tracks themselves. But they're new original compositions. They're kind of at the L1, L2 stage for music. But it's music that you can fall in love with, that is original and you own it, and the actual composer's already has written it anyway. So it's more of a collaborative process that way. So I think I'd always, not always, because sometimes the temp thing is the way of getting to something very quickly. But yeah, I mean, the audience for these things is pretty slim and pretty low for temp work. I mean, it's only going to be seen by a few people. So yeah, rip that Band-Aid off as soon as possible.
Last question.
Last question comes from Mickey McAture again in the Philippines. Do you use game sound engines such as WWise or Fmod? Would you recommend developing with them or rolling your own?
Well, I mean, yeah, sort of middleware, game audio middleware engines have been around for quite a while now. So, maybe we're talking about 15 to 20 years, maybe longer in Fmod's case. So, they're quite enriched at this point. They have a lot of features, and there's probably features in both of those middlewares that, you may
Which
not,
do you see
you
the
might
most
not
often?
even use. Which do I see the most of? It's usually Audio Kinetics Wise that I come across the most often. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they're fully featured. They kind of do everything you need them to do at this point. Again, if you're really out there and creating something that's like a game that's not really been made before and is doing something really different, then you probably work closer to the code, and so you probably want to either write your own layer, abstraction layer of audio engine in there. I mean, if you're doing a lot of runtime audio manipulation for whatever reason, then it may be better to do that kind of stuff. But again, the audio engine's a big responsibility. It's got to be supported, and it's got to have pretty sizable tech teams to support that stuff. So it's a big thing to do. I mean, like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, most big companies had their own proprietary audio engines. That's kind of like a sort of first wave of audio technology, really. And then audio middleware became very ubiquitous. It's sort of like a second wave. And now I think we're in this sort of third wave of programmers building things in between the audio engine and the game engine just to do something specific. So, just like sort of, the bits between the bits, almost pipelines that are very custom within one particular company, that are basically using that sort of middleware as a starting point.
Rob, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah,
such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's great. Yeah, I'm so glad you reached out. This has been great. Yeah,
absolutely.
Amazing.
Fantastic hour. So this has been really, I just feel like it's just really great when we're talking to someone who's really a practitioner, who's been in this for a long time, and it's not theory. It's just, this is the way it looks like for us. It's just,
this is the fantastic way. Yeah,
this is the way. This is the way. And for everyone, Rob's book, Working with Sound, is a great book. I'm not all the way through it yet, but I've been reading it as we came to this. Just really, really good read. I think that, especially as an overview for all the different aspects that are coming together, and from remote production to the things that you're going to deal with, it's just a great overview of understanding what it's going to take. It's not really the technical of this is how we do every layer. It's really just understanding what the process is, and it's a really, really great book. So I would highly recommend it. Working with Sound, again, with Rob Bridgett. And thanks to our producers for all the great questions, kept us all rolling through here. Thanks to our panelists, can't do this without you. And thanks to the incredible team, the small village that stands up every day to make sure that this show happens. We have the development team that's building how this show actually gets created. We've got our management team that figures out who's gonna show up and make sure that they're ready. And of course, the production team that's getting this done every single day, and we really appreciate your contribution. We traveled 117,000 miles, 188,000 kilometers today, and that equates to 929 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. That was so good. It was really good.
Great day. Thank you, Rob.
It's one of our best hours. It was really good.
What does that banana sound like?
It's a different room than the last time I saw you, Rob. I think it's much
It
more
is a different room.
spacious.
Yeah, we've moved.
Great.
I was in Montreal before.
There's so much more room now.
Yeah, I know. Less books.
It was a good set though. It was a very good set
Oh, yeah.
for that,
Oh, yeah.
for that shoot. Yeah, exactly. But you'd have a lot of depth now. You'd be able to.
Yeah.
It's good. Thanks again.
To take some time
Nice.
off and put those pictures
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I've been meaning to do that. It's difficult on these kind of walls, though. They've got the wrong angle.